I love it because, like I was kind of considered an underdog for most of my career. I was like the guy, like, you're a fighter? Like, what? Oh, this guy's going to get wrecked. And that was always a fun to kind of like prove people wrong and talk about the ultimate underdog. Like Bitcoin, it proves everybody wrong. You have the most powerful country in the world about to announce something on this level is pretty mind-blowing, and things can get pretty crazy pretty quickly. Clearly something isn't working, and you talk about a guy that has been oppressed probably by that same system that Bitcoin fights against, and that's a great way to see how powerful that tool is.
This podcast is entertainment, not financial, tax, or legal advice. Views expressed represent statements of the speaker in their individual capacity, do not represent the views of Unchained, and should not be considered investment advice. Speakers often have personal, family, or business connections to Unchained, which may include direct financial benefits. Please see our disclosure at unchained.com/podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Frontier podcast. This week I have on Kenny Florian. Kenny, how's it going?
What's up, Joe?
Glad to have you. Appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, man. Good to be here. I didn't get a chance to talk to you at the Saylor party, so we get to do it here.
I know. I'm sad I missed you there. It was an epic party for sure. And so I want to ask you about that later on. But before we get started, like for those that may have not heard you like on a Bitcoin podcast before, who are you and what's your background?
Cool. Yeah. So I am Kenny Florian. I used to fight in the UFC. I fought there for around 7 years. Prior to that, I was a martial artist. I kind of went a different route. I graduated from Boston College. I think I felt a lot of pressure to go to law school and kind of had this experience that I consider kind of a near-death experience. And I was like, wait a sec, it kind of just got me to kind of, I guess, reanalyze my life in a way and realize that, hey, I really like this thing called martial arts. Life is short. Let me pursue this and see where it goes. I had no intention of being a fighter, but I did. Became a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then, decided, a fight sounds really scary to me. Let's try that. Let's see what happens. And one fight led to another. I was invited to be a part of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. I was like the smallest guy on the show. I was the least experienced guy on the show, and ended up making it to the final. Lost miserably in the final, and it was at that point where I was like, okay, that was embarrassing. That did not go the way I wanted it to. Let's approach this like a real professional and really kind of figure out what I did wrong and pursue this fighting thing. And led to a career at, like I said, is 7 years in the UFC, fought for 3 world titles in 2 different weight classes, and learned a lot in that process. That ended up leading to a broadcasting career for the UFC and mixed martial arts in general. Had an opportunity to do broadcasting for a show called BattleBots as well, where engineers from all over the world build these robots that kind of fight each other as well. So my whole life has kind of revolved around fighting, man. And now have a podcast with John Anik, who's the lead commentator for the UFC. Been doing that since like 2016 or so. Well, I guess it's going to be 10 years. Yeah, 2015. It'll be 10 years this year doing the podcast. So yeah, that's pretty much my story. Yeah.
I love it. What do you like more, like actually fighting or more the broadcasting side of things?
Gosh, fighting, it's bittersweet. I love it. I loved the training and the preparation. That was really cool. It's kind of like, it's kind of like being institutionalized in a way. Like, I didn't even know what day it was. It was just like, this is my day of doing strength and conditioning and jiu-jitsu, or, boxing and wrestling, or whatever it was for that day. And that was cool. Just kind of dedicating myself to kind of getting better every single day with a very specific focus. So that was really interesting. And that was like 6 days a week, 2-3 times a day. But at the same time, there's a lot of injuries with that. Sometimes the business side of fighting isn't so fun, but I do miss the competition part, especially probably the training part of it, because you really feel like you're kind of on the cutting edge of things, like pushing the envelope, trying to do things that other people aren't doing, or trying to learn things that other people are doing and figuring that out. It's a lot of problem solving and a lot of strategy and like tactical application, I guess.
What was the hardest part? Was it like the mental side of the training, or was it like the physical, toughness side and just building your physical body better?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's all really difficult. I guess for me in particular, if I were to hone in on one specific thing, it would probably be the weight cutting aspect. That was not fun for anyone who's wrestled and stuff like that. I'm sure they can relate to that. It's a brutal process, especially when you're losing a lot of weight. There was one fight or a couple fights in particular where I'm like in the 180 some odd pounds trying to get down to 145 pounds, and I only have a couple months to do it. So it takes a tremendous amount of discipline and suffering and focus and dieting and planning and and also like finding out what your limits are, as a human, and understanding that sometimes your toughness can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Sometimes you push a little bit too much than what you probably should, and so that's kind of an interesting balance, I guess.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I definitely want to talk about Bitcoin too. Like with your entire journey of fighting and then now doing broadcasting and the podcast, when did Bitcoin get involved? And do you remember like the first time you initially heard about it?
I remember it really well. I was at dinner with kind of a new acquaintance, new friend, and he was telling me, he's like, man, you would love this thing called Bitcoin. It just dropped. It's at like $72 or $75. It was in the $70 range. And he's like, you got to look into this. You should buy some. And I was like, okay. And kind of asked him like, well, what is this thing? And, he gave me some kind of basic explanation of what it was. And, immediately in my head, it's like, I wrote it off. I'm like, well, clearly the government's going to shut this down, not really knowing any of the technical aspects of it, or really not much at all. So I kind of dragged my feet on it. I think I looked it up a little bit, and it seemed like it was a little difficult to buy at the time. And I was in, I guess, more real estate at the time. I had a couple places in Massachusetts, and then was living in a place in Los Angeles. So to me, I was like, well, could I do it? Absolutely. Even if I just put a little bit of money in. And then I just kind of dragged my feet on it and didn't do it. It was kind of like I made excuses of why I shouldn't more than anything else. And was like, this is not going to work. I'm just going to throw away this money. It's never going to come back, whatever. And then it wasn't until 2016 where I started, really kind of learning about it a little bit more, and was more interested in other opportunities besides kind of real estate and just like investing in mutual funds and things like that, just kind of the basic crap that I was doing at the time. And I was like, you know what? I think now's a good time to kind of get into it. I was like, it sucks that I didn't get it at $70 or whatever, but I think it was like maybe in the $800 range, something like that, if my memory serves correctly. And bought a little bit of that, bought a little bit of some other coin, and someone's like, well, you should go with something that's cheaper, man. Like this is going to be other thing. So I did that, and then it wasn't until 2017 where I really was kind of like, okay, I own this thing. What is this, and what's the difference? Like, really started looking into it, and then I was like, oh, okay, like Bitcoin's the thing. And was all in on Bitcoin in 2017, and have been buying ever since. And it's been one of those journeys, like so many others, where you're just constantly learning and constantly trying to deepening your understanding of what Bitcoin is and what the benefits are. And it leads you down all these crazy paths. And I feel like every day is an opportunity for me to learn, and, listening to guys like yourself and all the great information that's out there now, especially in the last few years, is just such a game changer now, where you can get it relatively quickly, where I feel like back 2016, 2017, we didn't have as many resources like we do now. So it's really cool for those that are out there that want to learn. It's like, there's no excuses. And I think that it's very easy for people to just take a quick glance at Bitcoin, and like make these very basic judgments on what it is. And I think that's going to be a costly mistake for many, many years for a lot of people. And it was for me, listen, I'm in a great position now, I feel like, but of course, you always want more Bitcoin. And I feel that it behooves anyone who's out there who's interested in it or is looking to kind of looking at something different as a digital asset that's going to change your life. Bitcoin is the thing and the best investment I think you can make.
Yeah, I mean, I love asking that question to people because most people that are deeply interested and involved in Bitcoin, when they first heard about it, they were like, what is this? It's a scam, it's a Ponzi scheme, it's fake internet money. So it's fun to hear. Like that's a very common initial assumption of what Bitcoin is.
I love it because, you know, like I was kind of considered an underdog for most of my career. I was like the guy, like, you're a fighter? Like what? Oh, this guy's going to get wrecked. And that was always a fun to kind of like prove people wrong and talk about the ultimate underdog. You know, like Bitcoin, it proves everybody wrong. Like in all the assumptions that people make about it, like not only are you wrong, it's like the exact opposite of what you think. You know, it's like, oh, Bitcoin uses too much energy. You're like, well, that's actually what makes it so powerful. That's what makes it so secure. It's what makes it so efficient. You know, people are like, oh, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. You know, it's like, no, correction. It's like, it's decentralized nature and the fact that you can, you know, send it peer to peer and all this stuff. It's like, you know, even from like Bitcoin, like, oh, like my initial assumption, like the government's going to shut it down. It's like, no, the government's going to end up having to use it. You know, so it's fascinating hearing how Bitcoin is just this ultimate underdog that consistently finds a way to, you know, humble you.
Yeah, I love it. I know I didn't send my list of questions over, but one of my questions was, is Bitcoin an underdog? So
no, that's so
funny.
Right on.
But I totally agree with what you were saying earlier. Back like 2017, at least when I remember hearing about Bitcoin, like I remember reading the Nakamoto Institute by like Pierre Rochard and Bitstein and a couple others. Yeah. And like, it was a weird blog that was like very unprofessionally designed. And I was like, this makes perfect sense, but it's a little sketchy.
Yeah. And a lot of them were like highly technical. Like, you know, it kind of talked about the technical aspects. And I think they were trying to like prove some of the like technological advantages and things like that. And for me, some of that stuff like over my head at the time. And anyways, I feel just the education of it all is just so much better now.
Mm-hmm. Was there a particular moment in time where it like really clicked for you? Like, obviously, I think you said 2017, which makes sense. The number was going up. That obviously helps everyone, you know, feel more confident in it. Was there anything else, or was it just like the market timing and you've seen it and you'd read enough about it that you were like, this thing is not going away?
Yeah. You know, I think it was kind of an evolution for me. It was maybe not one thing in particular, but it was a bunch of things that kind of blew my mind, I guess. And even like the way that I saw it kind of, and still do, like kind of changes over time. You know, the fact that it was this like provable ledger, you know, just that aspect and how like that was pretty cool. How it's like this time chain of truth that is verifiable, which is, you know, so different from the system that we're in and what we've known as money. And also just like, I don't know, just figuring out how it goes against everything that we thought was true. And anytime I find things like that, I always find it really fascinating. And I don't know, like even like something like, you know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, not to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but, you know, I remember, you know, when the UFC first came around, it initially was about, you know, which martial art was the best. And in my mind, you know, growing up watching a bunch of Bruce Lee movies and Chuck Norris and all these other movies, it was like, well, obviously the karate black belt or the boxer, the guy who can knock everybody out is going to be the best fighter. Like clearly that's what we've been told and what we believe to be true. And you had this Brazilian family, this place in Brazil, which is not known for martial arts necessarily. And it was this grappling art, which isn't really known to be that effective in one-on-one combat. And here they were defeating the best strikers in the world without a lot of times like throwing a punch, and you're like, wow, this goes against everything I knew to be true. And I think once you have that, like it starts to open your mind. And I think that was also helpful for me, and knowing that like, hey man, you've been proven wrong many times before. There's very few experts in the world. Open your mind, listen, figure out what this thing is, and yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely fascinating. I'm curious, like with your Bitcoin journey, like has Bitcoin changed the way that you just completely think about wealth and like personal finance, or like how has it changed? I guess since you were fighting and maybe making money fighting and doing something with that money, like as it, what's the difference between your post Bitcoin discovery and early days?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I guess to kind of get back to what you were talking about in regards to like what allowed it to click. Another thing that allowed it to click, and why I can kind of answer this question at the same time, is the fact that like it's defensive properties. Like a lot of times with fighting, we think about like, oh, like what am I going to do to be able to defeat that guy? Like I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do this, and that. And you don't think about, okay, like first let's try to like not get hurt. I can't defeat you if I can't get hurt. And I think Bitcoin has a very distinct and powerful defensive quality, in my opinion, in that there's very few attack vectors. And that to me, like when I realized that, I was like, oh, wow. Like, wait a sec. The fact that there isn't a CEO, there isn't a team behind it that's marketing this or that. Like there are no attack vectors in that way. The fact that, it's been built up technologically through a decentralized, by all these decentralized nodes globally. You can't just shut it down. It is as simple as like me saying, all right, I have this decree where no one's allowed to use Bitcoin anymore. It's like, well, you kind of have to shut down the internet now, which is not going to happen. And you start to see these things and you're like, wow. So first, if you look at it from that perspective and how, it really is more of like a risk off asset, even though people don't really see it as that, I think that kind of changes a lot of things for me. Like real estate, obviously, all the things that you're paying in regards to, utilities and property taxes throughout the years. And, if you're going to rent it out to somebody, now that's kind of a potential liability, both legally and whether they even want to pay you, depending on what state you're in. Sometimes they have more rights than the owner, right? So there's all these things that I have seen from, owning properties where it's a pain. And even like, okay, well, now you want that money from your house that went up. Cool. Well, how much did you lose in owning it? And now who's going to buy it? And is the market good for it to be bought? And, Bitcoin, you could sell it whenever you want, 24/7. So there's just so many more advantages. And I think that like, just like fighting, you can't have all of the things, but you want to have most of the things, and you want to limit what your opponent can have. And I think that with Bitcoin, there's so many more advantages than disadvantages. And that to me is an extremely powerful thing. It's like, maybe I'm not going to hit you with 100 punches, but if I hit you with 5 punches and you hit me with 0 punches, I'll take that all day over me landing 100 and you landing 60 punches, right? Does that make sense? So yeah. I feel like, the advantages that you get from something like Bitcoin just is so much better than any other investment. And not to mention, obviously, like, show me an investment that's going to give you 60% CAGR year after year. Like, if you can show me that, like, cool, maybe, you'll have my attention. But like, until then, no financial planner is going to like, tell me that, like, listen, give me your money and let me do something with it. Like, no.
Yeah, you made a really good point about like the counter arguments against Bitcoin. And I think like over the years, similar to you, like that's kind of what made me so bullish, is like you would hear very smart, intelligent people go out there and say Bitcoin is not a good, way to save for the future because of X, Y, and Z. Right. And then if you like look into X, Y, and Z and you're like, like that's not really a good answer to that question. Right. And then you're like, maybe this person hasn't done the research into what Bitcoin actually is.
Yes. Yeah.
So crazy to think about it.
Yeah.
I know you were at Michael Saylor's New Year's Eve party. Yeah. What did you think about it?
It was cool, man. Listen, I think that anytime you're around a bunch of Bitcoiners, it's a good time. enjoy kind of talking about Bitcoin and learning from all the experts out there. So I didn't really get that opportunity as much as I would like. It's a party and it's loud and, people are there to have a good time. If I'm at a conference or something like that, that's really enjoyable. But being at a unique party like that and celebrating what I think is a huge milestone in Bitcoin's, lifespan is huge. I remember when Michael Saylor was kind of talking about it on Twitter, and I had no idea that I would actually be at that party one day. I'm like, whoa, this is kind of surreal. I'm actually here. It was really cool to kind of celebrate that. It's funny hearing, people like hate on it and all that stuff. Like, there's so much more we need to do and all this stuff. But like, I think you also have to have a good time and celebrate your wins and also understand, like, man, like if you've been a part of the Bitcoin journey for anything longer than like a year and a half, 2 years, you've been there on the lows, man. And it just feels good to know that, like, yes, we are here now. This is what everybody was talking about. This is what we believed in. And we're here. And I still think it's very, very early. I think this is just the beginning now.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. To me, like, I've worked in the space for years now, and it's like going to that event, that party is like probably one of the coolest events that I've ever been to in regards to Bitcoin. Do you ever go to Bitcoin conferences or not?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. I've been to a couple and met some really good people, some good friends, which is awesome. So, and then I got an opportunity to talk to some people that I have been wanting to talk to for a long time, which is really cool. And yeah, it's a small world, man. Like, meeting Lawrence Lepard, who like grew up, like he's in the town over for me, and we knew some of the same people, which is, it's a town of like 5,000 people, so anyways, that was pretty cool. And, just all the great conversations. It's always fun, talking to Bitcoiners, man. And seeing Saylor's place, of course, was unreal, man. It's inspiring. It's amazing to see what he's accomplished, personally and professionally. And, I think that's always helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. His place was incredible for sure. And like, to me, the other thing that's kind of unique about Bitcoin is a lot of our work, at least my experience, is like a remote. And so like whenever Bitcoiners all get together in person for an event, it's always a fun time actually talking to people.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's cool. What do you think is like the biggest misconception now around Bitcoin when you're talking to Bitcoin, like in your space and like your podcast or your coworkers or your friends or whoever? Like what's kind of like the common hurdle that you think people have at this point?
Well, I think like the easy answer would be that people immediately call it a Ponzi or a scam, right? But let's say they have some knowledge of it and they have some awareness of the fact that like these huge financial institutions are like investing in it and it's becoming more legitimized. I don't know, legitimized because they're into it, but it's just more accepted, I guess, now. But now the thing I think that's misunderstood is like the whole volatility thing. And the fact that it's like, well, how else are you supposed to make a lot of money in investment if it's not like volatile? But I think that's kind of a big hurdle for a lot of people. And what scares a lot of people off, I'm on some chat with like a bunch of former fighters, and it's weird. I almost feel like I can't even like inject myself into the conversation because there's so much to the conversation of Bitcoin. Like they were talking about like investing their money, and people are throwing out all these ideas. And I'm like, oh gosh, this is painful to read. But and I try not to be like, oh, I'm on my high horse. But at the same time, you're like, there's so many misconceptions about investments in general, and I think there's just a lot of blind spots when it comes to that. And I think volatility is something that scares a lot of people away. Or they'll call it, risk. And Saylor, of course, talks about this all the time. It's like, there's risk in everything we do. It's like,
secure your retirement with a Bitcoin IRA from Unchained. Right now, get started with no setup fees and enjoy your first year free. You can open a Roth and traditional Bitcoin IRA and even upgrade old forgotten 401ks and IRAs into tax advantage Bitcoin where you control the keys. Get started today at unchained.com/frontier. There's no better way to hold tax advantage Bitcoin for decades. That's unchained.com/frontier. And now back to the show.
You guys fought for a living. Like, there was risk in that. Like, you know, the odds of you even making it to the level of fighting in the UFC, for example, are like slim to none. And the fact that, you know, you could be a champion in this sport is like 0.001%. So, you know, not to say like that means that you should just throw away money at any idea that comes your way, but it's like, okay, if it's volatile and people are making money and you're seeing these statistics on like what the returns are, don't you think it's worthwhile for you to investigate it and also like investigate it fully, or is it to the best of your ability anyway? You know, like people be like, oh, that's too volatile. Like, I'm just gonna like, my buddy does real estate and I'm just gonna like do real estate. I'm just gonna like buy some Airbnbs or whatever, you know, and I don't know. So I think that we have a long way to go still in regards to education. I think that's always the most important thing. And finding the best and easiest ways to explain that, I think, is going to be key to adoption in the future. And, you know, people can argue that like, well, now for people to invest $100,000 or whatever it is at right now to buy a Bitcoin, like, you know, is it out of reach for the regular person? Like who, you know, not a lot of people have like just $100,000 cash sitting around that you can invest in something. But at the same time, you don't need to buy, like, that's the other thing maybe, that you don't need to buy a full Bitcoin. You can buy, you know, you can DCA, you know, every day, weekly, monthly, whatever it is into Bitcoin. And everybody also, I think, always says it's too late. Like, oh, it's too late. You know, I should have done it many years ago. Now it's too late. It's like everybody has said that. And I think if you know where this is going, which I believe is in the millions, it's not going to be too late.
Yeah, I mean, I remember over the years, like people have, you know, pushed something like Sats a lot, like showing that, like, hey, like, yeah, you can buy one Bitcoin for $10,000, but now $100,000, or you can buy like one Sat for less than 1 cent. Like, do you have a perspective on that? Like, do you think it's helpful for like more normal people that are like, oh, you know, I'm scared to, I mean, I either don't have $100,000 or like, I don't want to put $100,000, as that's a lot of money to a lot of people, right, into this random internet money that I just heard of. Like, is it worthwhile to like talk about Sats or like talk about unit bias, or like even like I've heard people talk about the idea of like rebranding Sats to Bitcoin, just saying that like, hey, you can buy one Bitcoin for a very cheap amount. Like, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I don't love that so much, like the, you know, rebranding it to Satoshis, but I don't know. I think that if you're able to bring into the context of where Bitcoin is headed without sounding like a loon, you know, because it's hard. Like, someone asked me, well, actually on my podcast, you know, that was asked on a prediction of where Bitcoin's going to be in 2026 or something like that. And I don't always love those questions, but you know, it's almost like I feel like I need to kind of like, my conversations for normies as opposed to other Bitcoiners are very different, because if you're like, Bitcoin's going to like, it could potentially be like $1 million in 2025, which I think is actually possible. I don't know if it's going to happen, but like, I wouldn't be surprised. Let's put it that way. Right. And at the same time, if you're saying that to someone who has little to no knowledge of Bitcoin, they're like, you're a crazy person. Like, you're clearly biased and like, and no. So like, but at the same time, you also need to like put it into that context to say, well, if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, then clearly if you're putting this amount of money in every week, that one Sat could be $1 one day or whatever it is, you know? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's like, it's not an easy or quick conversation necessarily, if that makes sense. And I think that like, I don't know. Sometimes the more I think about how to frame Bitcoin, the more confused I get is like on how to have that conversation, just because there's so many different avenues of which to attack it. And maybe it varies person to person of how you should do it, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of like conversations with like non-Bitcoin people, I had someone like ask me the other day, they were like, do you think I should buy some Bitcoin? Like, is that a good idea? And like, well, like, don't give me the biased answer because you work for a Bitcoin company. I was like, I work for a Bitcoin company because I like actually believe in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just like I'm selling to have a job. Like, I liked Bitcoin and then decided to work for Bitcoin.
Right. Right.
Did you talk about Bitcoin a lot on your podcast, or do you, or not necessarily?
Time to time.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, from time to time we'll talk about it, if like the price goes up or, something related to it with regards to investments or something like that. Or, they'll make jokes about like, hey, would you ever gamble one Bitcoin on this fight? Like, no, so anyways, yeah, from time to time we do, but it's mostly all fighting, all fight nerd stuff. Yeah.
So I figured.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference? Like, do you I guess I don't know how often your podcast is, but like, do you prefer to talk about fighting over Bitcoin? Do you prefer to talk about Bitcoin over fighting, or a good mix?
So I like a good mix, like I feel like I talk about fighting so much and have for so long. Like it's been such a big part of my life that if I have something that's new and unique, I'd prefer to talk about that. So I'd probably prefer to talk about Bitcoin and maybe not even talk about it, more listen about it. Like I am listening to something Bitcoin related every single day, like every day, just because I just want to be, more educated on it, see where it's going, see what's happening, especially now. Obviously, there's a huge political conversation about it, and it feels like, I don't want to get too far ahead, but it just feels like everything that Bitcoiners have been talking about for a long time, like I don't know if it's here, but it's almost here. And that is interesting. It's both scary and cool at the same time. So it's a great time to be involved with Bitcoin and especially just like, again, all the ups and downs that I think we've all been through and all the conversations we've had. It's like, we're right there. We're knocking on that door now.
Yeah, I know you brought up the the idea of a lot of people would say, oh, governments will ban Bitcoin in the past, and now we are like literally on the cusp of a potential strategic reserve. What are your thoughts on that in general?
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. I saw something in regards to Trump talking about how we're now going to be calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. So now like anything is possible now, dude. Like it's just like Trump's going to do anything and everything to just tick people off. So I don't know, man. Like, there's the fact of like, do we want, this slow grind up in price, or do we want this explosion price? I don't know. Like, what that does to something like, U.S. Treasuries globally. I don't know what that does as far as like confidence in the dollar. I don't know. Does it strengthen it? Does it? I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but it's interesting that we're knocking on this door, and this thing that we've talked about for so long of all of these countries that have been in massive debt, that Bitcoin has always been this escape hatch for countries all over the world. That was one of the things that made it extremely intriguing. If you're looking towards like the ultimate end game, that was something that was like, yeah, no, you need this, Kenny. You need to get this and get as much as you can, because that is almost an inevitability. And the fact that we're talking about this now, 2024, 2025, we're here now, and you have the most powerful country in the world about to announce something on this level is pretty mind blowing, and things can get pretty crazy pretty quickly. So I'm curious to see what happens in the first few days of Trump being, back in the presidential seat, and we'll see what happens, man. Interesting time.
Yeah, I agreed. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the timing of what happens if anything happens. I definitely agree. It's like, we're rebranding the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. It's anything's fair game.
It's possible, man. Greenland's ours now. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's wild. And I do agree. Like, you brought up that the idea of like, if the United States is going to actually do a strategic Bitcoin reserve and potentially buy 1 million Bitcoin with the Bitcoin Act of 2024, like that is like a massive like change in like how the entire probably global financial system works, how like geopolitics works, how like, settling trade among nations works. So like it could truly change everything.
Absolutely, man. And just all the synergy around it. It's like, of course, it's going to be some maverick who comes in to this powerful position and decides to do it. And Trump is that guy. So, like, I don't know, man. I'm not saying it's 100% going to happen, but I think it's more likely than people think. And if there's one thing Trump has done while he's been in office, is surprise people and not be afraid to take chances and do things that are different. I mean, clearly something isn't working, and you talk about a guy that has been oppressed probably by that same system that Bitcoin fights against, and that's a great way to see how powerful that tool is.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, I mean, like, I think some people like are like worried about it to some extent, because they're like, this is a big change. Like, this could be a big change really fast. But it's also like, if we're right about Bitcoin, which obviously I think we are, and Bitcoin is the best money, then it's like, whether you're an individual corporation or a nation state, like you should buy Bitcoin before it goes up a lot, because the history of Bitcoin is getting more and more valuable because it's the best money out there. So the same, I'd much rather the United States have 1 million Bitcoin than some other foreign adversary.
Definitely, man. It's crazy. It's like there's this tool that's available to everyone that's just sitting there, and it's juicy, and it's almost like, again, it's inevitable. And I feel like that this drill I used to do when I was playing soccer, where you'd sit at a cone and the coach would blow a whistle, and there'd be something in the middle that everybody would have to race to get and like bring back to their cone, and basically do like suicide sprints back, shuttle runs back and forth. And I feel like the whistle has been blown and everyone's afraid to go out there and get it, like globally, like between countries. And once that starts, man, like it's going to be a mad race. And I feel like, I don't know, it's this double-edged sword of like the very thing that's going to save you. It should be this very thing that like kills the currency in some ways, or like kills the existing system. And that's a scary thing for a lot of people to kind of deal with. And obviously there's going to be a lot of powers around Trump that are going to do whatever possible to like keep this thing going. And I don't think it's going to be like this, like immediate destruction. I think that both can live side by side for a little bit, but in my simple brain, that's the way I see it anyway for the next little while. But I don't know. It's a really, really interesting time, man. But we'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing about like Saylor is I feel like Bitcoin pre-Saylor was just like a bunch of people on the internet, like kind of having fun with digital internet money. Like no one was like, if we were very serious about it, right? Yeah. But like we weren't investing billions and billions of dollars in it. And then you have like Michael Saylor comes in, who literally can raise billions of dollars, buy more Bitcoin, and then you go to his house and you're like, wow, this is like the elite of America, and like this is serious now.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention and all the people that were there as well, Joe, right? It's like, you got Bill Miller walking around and all these, other big investors. And you're like, well, okay, if we're going to make things happen, and the same people that were kind of restricting Bitcoin, they're playing dirty games, if you want to call it dirty games. Well, it's like Bitcoiners fought back as well with their own games. And I think that there's a strong argument to be made that, Trump may be in office because of Bitcoiners, right? And their influence, not solely because of them, but I think they played a big part in their influence. And that's powerful. And it shows the power of people who got in early and who are willing to put their Bitcoin on the line to make changes for this country and to make this a better place, and to kind of get away from the craziness that I believe has been rampant, for a little while now. So it's amazing. And that alone just shows its power. So I think that, I think that it's just wild to think about the resources that those people have too, of like, okay, if we're going to do this, what are we going to do? You can't just play checkers out there. You have to play a game of chess and have various resources out there. And the people they're going to be doing that are the people who have hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars that can set up resources, not for like the short term, but for the long term. Like this win or all these things that are playing out from Bitcoin didn't happen overnight. That this is years in the making, in my opinion, of, influence, education, lobbyists, whatever it is that have kind of come together synergistically to get us to this point. And it's really cool to witness it.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like we're like on the cusp of a really big domino falling, right? Like it could be the United States that like does a big announcement, relatively soon, or it could be another large country that like says we are going full Michael Saylor mode.
Right.
We're on a Bitcoin standard, and then that's going to just cause the other dominoes to fall, and it could accelerate. Definitely.
It's an amazing tool that people realize how powerful it is now, and I think it's going to be a mad race in the very near future.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're talking to like someone in your audience that has no idea about Bitcoin, maybe like a little bit about investing, like what is your kind of your elevator pitch for Bitcoin? As simple terms as possible.
Yeah, gosh, it's definitely evolved. I think that like with anything, so often the people who release the information first are like so often ridiculed, so I feel like I'm constantly that person in like maybe the circles that I run with, like, in my area, my neighborhood, there's a bunch of, hedge fund guys and all these financial guys. And, I've gotten into conversations with them about things. And, sometimes it's like, you're just dealing with hard-headedness and, approaching it from that perspective is tough. And I don't know, like I've thought about like, okay, first, I almost want to hear what their take on money is first. Like,
yeah.
What do you think money is? And then what do you think Bitcoin is? And then sometimes approach it from that point and just kind of go point by point and like have a conversation about that. Because I think sometimes if you go all in on that, like you can go on all these other tangents where it's like, well, let me hear what you say first. Like, what are your perspectives on money? How you see it? And then let's have a conversation about that. And then see how, if you do see some of the vulnerabilities or horrible parts about fiat and like, then we can maybe go piece by piece on how maybe Bitcoin fixes some of those things and why it's a better system. So there's that aspect, but I think the key is like, so a lot of times the way I take it, is I always ask like, hey man, if you wanted to, if I needed $20,000, and you needed to go to your bank to go get that, and I needed that like now or tomorrow, could you get that for me? And they'd be like, well, no, I'd need to probably fill out all these forms. It would probably take all this other time, and it would take, I was like, yeah, so if you have Bitcoin, like you don't need to go through any of that. Like the fact that there's people out there with fractional reserve banking or any bank in general that like gets to say what they do with your money and how you can use your money is just not cool or should be the case. You have been institutionalized. You have been used to this system. But that is not the norm. The fact that you don't actually have control over your money or your assets, like that's crazy. And kind of coming to the conclusion of like, Bitcoin is actually the only asset that you can own, assuming you have it in cold storage. Like that is the only thing that nobody can take from you,
Yeah.
So like, and again, like you could go down like the whole property rights, conversation and things like that. But like, I don't know, like, attacking it from that angle, I think has been helpful. I've been able to orange pill a lot of fighters, a lot of people in that space as well, which has been pretty cool. And now I kind of get like the calls and text messages of thank you and this and that. You were right. And, and it's not like I'm not right. Bitcoin was right, but hearing that's pretty cool. And sometimes you get some heated conversations like, it's funny. Like my family members are kind of the people who have resisted it the most. I was so proud of my sister, like right before it kind of went on a big run, she went out and started buying and like, it's just really cool to see that. Now she's like sending me stuff on Bitcoin. I'm like, I'm just so proud. And she's older than me. But the fact that she went in and like kept an open mind and is looking for something to help her situation. And it was just really cool. So yeah, yeah, all is not lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a cool moment when you have like people that are close to you that you've been talking about Bitcoin for a while. They finally like are sending you stuff about Bitcoin.
Right. It's like, yo, you're my little brother. I'm not supposed to listen to you, like.
Yeah. You brought up the idea of like, Bitcoin versus like the banking system withdrawing $20,000 or whatever. And it reminded me of like the meme where it's like with a bank, your transaction gets approved. With Bitcoin, your transaction gets confirmed. And like, those two words are like very critical to understand and like the difference. And obviously most people would probably glaze over when they like initially hear that. But like once you kind of understand the difference, you're like, wow, this is a big deal.
Totally. Like I used to get stuff made like all over the world. Like I used to get like, so I have a couple of gyms, like jujitsu academies. I have one in Boston and I had one in Los Angeles when I was living there a few years ago. And I used to get like uniforms and different like things made over there. And just the process of like having to wire money and get it approved and all, like it was such a pain in the butt. And it was so inefficient and took so much time to like, wait, so you're charging me for my money, like, because I want to send money to someone. Like this is not the way it should work. Like, and then once you're in Bitcoin, like it doesn't make any sense. You're like, wow, like what a crazy system. Anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
You shared the other day on Twitter, this is actually how I reached out to you and or guest you on the podcast, but you shared the Unchained retirement calculator.
Oh yeah.
Just talking about it. I guess you thought it was a cool tool. Like any thoughts on it?
Dude, it was awesome. Well, it was like, you plug in your numbers and you're like, okay, well, let's see where I'd be at based on where I think I might retire. This, and I was like, oh my God, this is, well, so I showed my wife, I'm like, hey, remember when I said that like it would probably be something like this? And I'm not saying, it's 100% accurate or whatever, but like, yeah, I think it's even at a conservative rate, like it was mind blowing. And that's cool, man. Like, people having the opportunity to do that and see that, like, even if you don't have any and going like, all right, if I accumulate this amount, where could this be in the future? You're like, yeah, man, maybe you just need to get to like a half a Bitcoin or a 0.1 or whatever it is. Like that may change your life one day. Assume you will not see that until you retire. You may have a very impressive nest egg that will change your life and potentially your kids' life and their kids' lives. So that was really neat to see that. And it was just a real simple, calculator that I thought was really helpful. And yeah, it was pretty mind blowing, man. It was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. That was awesome to see that you shared it. That was cool for us. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like an unpopular opinion that I've kind of had in the past is like, you don't need to be 100% in Bitcoin.
Right.
A little bit is going to make a big deal. And obviously it has in the past and it probably will continue in the future.
Definitely. And I remember like, even when I started accumulating, it was like, I had my goals and then like that would constantly shift to like, okay, cool. Yeah. I achieved that. Okay. Now let's see if I can get to this and get to that and get to that and just keep building. And man, you may surprise yourself of where you're able to do and what you can do to get to that level. And then once you realize like how powerful Bitcoin is and what it's going to do, you start selling things to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you see Bitcoin in 10 to 20 years, like big picture?
I think that it's going to be, as far as price wise, it's going to be in the millions. I think that it will be seen as kind of like oil back in the day, or a gold rush back in the day, except way more powerful. I think that it's going to demonetize a lot of things, and certainly not the first to talk about this, but like anything from like real estate to stocks, and like it's going to be something where if you don't have money in Bitcoin, then like you're not investing properly. It's just going to be something that everyone has or tries to have. I don't, scarcity wise, like I don't know how that's going to play out. Like if everyone's going to be able to get some, but I think it's going to be something that people look back on like, wow, we were not seeing this like the way it should. And I also think there's going to be a lot of things that, I certainly don't anticipate. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of things about Bitcoin that we didn't even see coming. There's going to be, we're already hearing about, things coming into market. Of course, Unchained has it, where you can get loans, get your Bitcoin. But I see like a lot of other, possibilities of like things that you can do with your Bitcoin, where you can, whether it's investing it or taking loans against it, and just having a lot of different resources of how you can kind of leverage your money. So I think that, price is nice, but I think people are going to be looking back at this thing and going, man, I wish I was more educated on this. How did I not see this? And I think it's going to be a lot of people that are like really smart, like hearing someone like Luke Broman, who's like one of the best macro, financial minds out there, and how he was talking about how it took him a while to really figure it out, even after he already had it and it was, in this game, like, neck deep in it. And now it took him a while to really see it and understand it. And I think that like people need to humble themselves and really pick at this and kind of go as deep as they can, because I do think this is our gold rush. This is like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's just crazy to think about, where it's been and where it's potentially going. It's like, yeah, you can look back, 10 years ago and you're like, oh, well, I should have bought a lot of Bitcoin. As obvious in hindsight, it's probably going to be the same thing, years from now.
Yeah. Like how often does a new asset come along?
Yeah.
Like that alone is rare. And then when you look at, just how powerful this asset is, like, I don't know, man, it's going to be a big time game changer. Even like, I think politically, right? Like globally, I think it's going to change the perception about how like governments operate as well.
Totally. Yeah. It's a big idea, and its time is coming, obviously, at this point. 2 more questions and we can close it out. What's something that you believe that a lot of Bitcoiners would disagree with?
Gosh, you got me. I don't know. What is something that I believe a lot of Bitcoiners may disagree with? Well, I guess if I'm looking at it from the perspective of like, I'm not like, I wish that we lived in a world where it's like, hey man, every pleb out there has gone out there and bought Bitcoin, and you know what? It's too late for governments and big institutions to get into it. And that's it. Like we did it. Every person who should be getting Bitcoin got Bitcoin, understood it, owns Bitcoin, and now there's nothing left for the big players to come in. And because a lot of people are like, screw the governments, like they don't need to have it, like they shouldn't have it. They're the last people who should have it, yada yada. And I understand that, but I also think that like we also need to, and maybe this isn't like different from a lot of people, but just maybe from some of the things that I've seen out there, it's nature. And nature is always going to take the path of least resistance, and nature is always going to go after the most powerful tools you can find, whether it's weaponry, energy, or financial tools. And they're going to do whatever it takes. Once they realize its power, then they're going to go after it, for better or worse. And that's just life. And also, it also says that like, nature is such that it can be cruel, and, the weaker animals die and bigger animals get the other weaker animals. And that's just what it is. And it's one of those things that like, of course, if a big, powerful country or a big, powerful institution can get this thing, they're going to try to get it. And, it's open to everybody. That's what makes it great. It's not always ideal, but like, that's what makes it great. It's available to anyone who has the money, and has the ability to go out there and buy it. And there's always going to be sellers, I think. And so, I mean, people are resistant to governments taking it, but it's like, of course they were going to. Like, why wouldn't they? It's a powerful tool for anybody, and they're not like cheering for it, but like, it's going to happen, guys. Like,
Yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like maybe even post Saylor, and especially now with potential like strategic reserve, like it seems like there's starting to become more of a division like in the Bitcoin community of like hardcore like anarchist libertarian types versus like maybe like more realistic of like there are big players, there are government, they exist. Just like an individual should buy Bitcoin, they're probably going to buy Bitcoin too, whether we like it or not.
yeah, and it's like, can we really be talking about the benefits of Bitcoin and how it's open to everybody? But like, it's open to everybody except these guys, like, except this guy, because I believe this and that. It's like, guys, it's open, it's open and decentralized. Like that's the game. So anyways, yeah, just play it the best you can. Yeah.
I also think like when you're thinking about like, saving for the future or whatnot, it's like, you shouldn't necessarily be, betting on things that you hope happen. You should be like realistic and seeing how the world's going to play out and then making your moves on the board before it actually plays out.
That's exactly right, man. That 100%. Yeah.
Last one, we can close it out. What do you think is the biggest risk to Bitcoin?
The biggest risk to Bitcoin. It's like there's always that black swan event where you're like, is it like a world war or something like that? But you're like, well, that's not necessarily a risk to Bitcoin. It's a risk to like everything. I'm not sure, man. Like, I don't really know. And maybe this is like foolish or immature, but like, I don't see a whole lot of them. Obviously they exist, right? But I don't know. Like, I think the quantum thing is, I don't think that's a real thing. I don't think, governments shutting it down at this point is a real thing. And any other like risk to it is kind of like a global risk. And now, I think that like the fact that, you have Trump talking about expanding, the grid and finding other sources of energy and really, seeking out new sources and better sources of energy is huge because, at a certain point you think that like, all right, well, maybe, that becomes kind of a problem, but like, I don't know, even then, like, I don't know, the miners are going to be producers of energy at a certain point. So I don't know. I don't know. Like, I think if you asked me this question like a few years ago, I may come up with something that wouldn't make sense, but like, I don't know. I don't see a whole lot. What do you see, Joe? I'm more curious. You have a better mind about this stuff than I do. What do you see as a potential?
I mean, I love asking. I typically ask people these two questions, and it always tends to stump the.
Really?
Guest.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're not alone.
I'm not the only idiot. Okay.
No, you're good. You're not at all.
Okay.
I mean, my view is like, I think I've said this before, is like cryptography, like fundamentally breaking. It's like there's no like mathematical guarantee that like the cryptography that underlines Bitcoin and like a lot of the way the internet works, like will never be broken by quantum computer or any just some sort of like crazy mathematician that discovers like a new way to do these advanced cryptographic algorithms. So like, I think that's a risk, but I also think that like it's very similar to like what you kind of said about like World War II or nuclear war or aliens coming down. Like that's a risk to not just Bitcoin, but a lot of different things that we rely on today. And we would have pretty big problems if, those risks come to reality, which, they could come to reality.
And it's kind of like a race, right? It's kind of like the fight game where it's like everyone's trying to outdo each other and everyone's kind of like trying to plan for this potential inevitability. So it's like becomes this race of who can kind of get there first or figure out, I don't know. But yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah. Kenny, no, this is incredible. Like, I'm really glad that you took the time to do this. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. Enjoy what you're doing for this space. Always educational and good to finally talk to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kenny.